The gray, heavy rain seemed to press down on the roof of the Oakwood District Courthouse, making the atmosphere inside even more somber and tense than usual. Dark wooden walls and neatly arranged cold benches exuded an oppressive solemnity. No one anticipated that what appeared to be a routine Tuesday afternoon hearing would become a pivotal moment altering many lives. The silence was suddenly shattered by a young yet resolute voice. "It's him, Mommy." The entire room fell silent. A 3-year-old black boy, sitting on his mother's lap, pointed his tiny finger directly at a police officer entering through a side door. No one laughed. No one spoke. The courtroom seemed frozen in that instant. The officer, Sergeant Thomas Reeves, known for his composure and toughness over 15 years of service, appeared stunned. His face changed subtly, a fleeting expression between shock and something deeper, darker. Fear. His hand trembled slightly, and the badge he once held firmly now seemed to slip from his tense fingers. In that moment, his entire career and the hardened exterior he had always maintained felt unexpectedly fragile. Tanya Wilson, the 28-year-old mother holding her son, was startled. She immediately leaned down, whispering urgently into his ear, "Shh, Isa, you mustn't point at people like that." But Isaiah's eyes showed no confusion. There was no innocent curiosity typical of a child, only certainty. A memory deeply etched in his young mind had resurfaced without mercy. "That's him, Mommy. The bad man at Grandma's house." The words cut through the heavy atmosphere like a knife. This time even those seated at the back heard clearly. A chill ran down many spines as all eyes turned toward the increasingly unsettled officer. At the judge's bench, the gavel struck the table, attempting to bring everyone back to the present. "Court is now in session." Judge Wilson's voice was firm, but something in his gaze had changed. He looked at the child, then directly at Sergeant Reeves, as if for the first time questioning whether he had overlooked something significant. Tanya clutched her son tightly. She didn't know what was happening, only that the attention on them was growing. She wasn't the defendant, not the plaintiff, just a witness in a robbery case from 6 months prior. She hadn't anticipated that bringing her son, simply because there was no one else to watch him, would ignite a storm, poised to upend everything she believed in. One of the robbers had been described as limping. Now Sergeant Reeves's uneven steps as he exited the courtroom took on an entirely new significance. What was previously assumed to be a typical health issue for a veteran officer now became a detail that left the entire room deep in thought. All eyes followed the door closing behind him with an eerie sense of apprehension. In the ensuing minutes, a series of quiet yet dramatic events began to unfold. Prosecutor Eleanor Hayes, always meticulous and steadfast, unexpectedly pulled out her phone, making a call with a grave expression. She gestured swiftly, her eyes scanning the murmuring witnesses. Then 2 plainclothes men entered the courtroom, positioning themselves at opposite exits. No introductions were needed. Their presence signaled that this was no longer an ordinary trial. Sergeant Reeves's cell phone, left behind on the table, began to vibrate incessantly. Each ring felt like the heartbeat of an approaching truth, powerful and unavoidable. No one in the room could have imagined that a simple statement from a 3-year-old would ignite the largest police corruption investigation in Oakwood's history. As everyone resumed their seats, a single question lingered in their minds. How could such a young child recognize a face he was never supposed to have seen? Over the next 48 hours, Tanya Wilson lived in a state of uncertainty, caught between fear and a fragile hope. She, her son, and her elderly mother suddenly became key witnesses and potential targets for those wishing to conceal the truth. Prosecutor Hayes ordered immediate protection. 2 plainclothes officers took turns guarding their small apartment in the Oakwood Heights housing complex around the clock. Tanya's life had been thrust into a different world, a world of secrets, danger, and irreversible choices. "Mommy, why are those men always watching our house?" Isaiah asked innocently while doodling at the kitchen table, his question tightening Tanya's chest. The child had no idea he had triggered a seismic event. "They're here to protect us, sweetheart," Tanya whispered, striving to keep her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. She hadn't realized that her simple testimony in a robbery case would place her at the heart of a covert force silently influencing the community. Her phone vibrated again. It was Hayes. For the third time that day, "Mrs. Wilson, I need you to come to the office tonight. Bring your son. And please, don't tell anyone where you're going." Hayes's voice, usually calm, now carried urgency, almost a warning. At 8:30 p.m., the prosecutor's office was unusually quiet. Hayes led Tanya and Isaiah through a dim hallway to a small conference room. Inside, an older man awaited them, his hair graying but his eyes sharp. Upon seeing Isaiah, his eyes lit up, as if he had found a beacon of hope after years of searching in the dark. "This is Detective Marcus Johnson, formerly of Internal Affairs. He's been quietly investigating a case involving a group of officers for over 3 years," Hayes explained, her tone serious. Detective Johnson opened his laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting off his weathered face, one marked by both anger and unshakable determination. "I've been tracking a series of robberies, targeting elderly African American and Latino individuals in this area. The perpetrators are always the same small group of officers, following the same pattern." On the screen appeared a stream of images. Officer Reeves alongside 3 others, showing up at various crime scenes, including the home of Tanya's mother. "Maybe you choose victims who live alone, monitor their routines, then strike on the day they receive their pension checks," Johnson said, each word like a knife twisting in Tanya's gut. The pieces slowly started falling into place, each keystroke brushing away the dust on long-buried memories, revealing the chilling truth beneath. "They're always the first to arrive at the scene," Johnson explained, scrolling through the photos. "And they're the ones who make the crucial evidence disappear from the start." His voice had lost its calm edge. Every word now bore the weight of years spent chasing justice in the shadows. "The issue isn't suspicion," he continued. "It's that no one could identify them because they always wore masks. No one until Isaiah came along." Tanya shivered. Her mind raced with questions. How could a 3-year-old identify someone the adults couldn't? A warm female voice echoed from the doorway. "Children have an extraordinary ability to perceive details that adults often overlook." It was Dr. Amara Davis, a forensic child psychologist. She offered a gentle smile as she sat next to Isaiah, her gaze kind yet penetrating. "They may notice movement, voices, the tiniest habits. These are the things that form a person's true identity," Davis explained gently. "Your son may have picked up on something about Officer Reeves that the rest of us, adults, have ignored for years." At that very moment, across town in a dimly lit bar, Officer Thomas Reeves sat with 3 fellow officers. They were all on edge. The whiskey glass in his hand trembled in time with his heartbeat. "It's just a coincidence, just a kid rambling nonsense," Reeves muttered, sipping his 3rd glass. His voice strained to sound calm, but betrayed his growing panic. "You see the feds at the courthouse?" Peterson, the oldest in the group, growled. "Hayes is digging deep. And Marcus Johnson showed up at the DA's office today." "Johnson's washed up. He's got no authority anymore," Reeves tried to sound dismissive, though his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "People see him as a paranoid old man. Besides, Chief Rivera still has our backs. He always has, until this blows up in the media," Peterson muttered. Reeves slammed his glass down hard. "Remember's just a kid. A 3-year-old's word against 4 decorated officers. Who's going to believe him?" That same night at the DA's office, Dr. Davis conducted a special session with Isaiah. Inside a cozy room filled with toys and dolls, Isaiah seemed to return to his own world. A small camera in the corner quietly recorded everything. "Isaiah, can you show me what the bad man did at Grandma's house?" Davis asked gently. The boy picked up a police doll, made it limp across the table, then with an eerily altered voice reenacted the memory that had haunted him. He yelled like this. Isaiah's voice turned into a hoarse, furious tone. "He hit Grandma when she didn't give him the money fast enough." Tanya froze, covering her mouth to stifle a sob. She had never heard her son recount these details before. They were too specific, too real. "There's one more thing you need to see," Johnson said, flipping through documents in his folder. "This is too much of a coincidence to ignore." He presented a series of bank statements. All 4 officers, including Reeves, had large cash deposits made to their accounts exactly 2 days after each reported robbery. "But coincidence alone isn't enough," Hayes interjected. "We need irrefutable proof, something a jury can't ignore." Just then, Isaiah, who had been quietly playing in the corner, suddenly stood up, his eyes lit with a spark of a critical memory. "Mommy, the bad man dropped this," he said, pointing down to the floor in a reenactment of the scene in his mind. "It was something shiny," Isaiah whispered. Everyone in the room looked at one another, stunned and hopeful all at once. A 3-year-old child, and a tiny detail that might be the final link to expose an entire criminal network. "The thing just like his," Isaiah said, pointing at the photo on the laptop screen, where Officer Reeves appeared wearing a gleaming commendation badge on his lapel. No one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were locked on the spot Isaiah indicated. The metallic glint now looked like a bloodstain against the stark white of a police uniform. If that badge had once been found at the crime scene but disappeared during the official investigation, it could now serve as irrefutable physical evidence to directly implicate an officer once hailed as a model of integrity. "Her mother's house," Hayes suddenly spoke, his tone shifting from skepticism to urgency. "Is she still living there? Did anyone thoroughly search the scene after the robbery?" "Yes," Tanya nodded. "She still lives there, but the investigation, they barely looked. They said it was a standard break-in, probably some local teens." 3 glances, Hayes, Johnson, and Davis, conveyed a message without a single word. If the badge was still in that house, buried beneath layers of dust and time, they could expose not just one corrupt officer, but an entire network hiding within a justice system once thought untouchable. Meanwhile, elsewhere, none of them knew that Police Chief Rivera had already signed an emergency reassignment order for Reeves. His destination, a small precinct near the Mexican border. The transfer would take effect within 72 hours. Just long enough for suspicions to cool and for the key figure to vanish from the reach of the law. But what no one anticipated was that the small hand that had pointed at a corrupt officer in court would not just topple a few rotten cops. It would crack the foundation of a decaying system built on prejudice and the exploitation of society's most vulnerable. At 5:30 a.m. the next day, a search commenced at Tanya's mother's modest home. The emergency warrant, secured by Hayes through a federal judge, bypassed the Oakwood Police Department's authority, an intentional move to block any internal interference. For 2 hours, forensic experts combed through every corner, every crack, every drawer. "Nothing," Johnson sighed, his eyes showing fatigue for the first time in the entire investigation. "If the badge was ever here, someone's already taken it." That's when Isaiah, wide-eyed with curiosity since the search began, gently tugged on Dr. Davis's sleeve. "It fell here," he said softly, pointing to a narrow gap between an old sofa and the wall. It made a clinking sound when it hit the floor. Forensic technicians immediately moved the heavy furniture, nothing visible. But when they slid a fiber-optic camera into the crack at the base of the wall, they saw it. A police badge, engraved on the back with the initials TR, lay wedged deep in the wall, a silent confession from a traitor. "We've got him," Hayes whispered, his eyes gleaming with resolve as he carefully lifted it with metal tongs and placed it into an evidence bag. The next 24 hours unfolded like a fast-paced thriller. As Hayes filed arrest and search warrants for the homes of the 4 suspected officers, over at the police chief's office, Rivera was quietly assembling transfer documents to help Reeves disappear from Oakwood. "That damn kid," Rivera muttered, unaware that his office door was slightly ajar and that his loyal, long-time secretary was standing just outside, listening to every word. 13 years building this network, and now it's falling apart because of a 3-year-old. He bit out every word like swallowing fire. Sandra Pearson, a quiet woman who had worked at the department for 2 decades, had never rebelled, never broken the unspoken code, loyalty to leadership. But that morning, she chose something else. Her hand shaking slightly, Sandra gripped her phone and dialed a number she had stored for years but never dared call. The FBI tip line. The call lasted less than 2 minutes, but its ripple would stretch wide like a silent earthquake. At 2:00 p.m., the editorial office of the local digital paper, the Oakwood Herald, received an anonymous tip. By 3:00, a breaking news article had gone live, raising serious questions about Officer Reeves' sudden reassignment. And by 4:00 p.m., national news outlets picked up the story, reporting on the bizarre case of a 3-year-old boy who exposed police corruption by pointing a finger in open court. At that moment, Sergeant Peterson was driving to an emergency meeting at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town when he suddenly saw FBI vehicles blocking the entrance. He tried to turn around, but it was too late. That evening, Officer Reeves sat alone in his apartment, an unfinished suitcase by the door. The news blaring from the television hit like hammer blows. His phone rang nonstop. Pettison, the police union attorney, Chief Rivera, he ignored them all. "We're standing outside the Oakwood Police Department where federal agents have just conducted searches and made arrests under a court order." The reporter's voice rang from the TV. "Sources confirm the investigation centers around a string of robberies targeting elderly African American and Latino residents." The doorbell rang. Reeves knew exactly who it was before he even got up. The next morning, the front page of the Oakwood Herald was filled with images of 4 officers in handcuffs being led out of the police station. The headline read, "Truth Through a Child's Eyes, Corruption Network Exposed by a 3-year-old." 1 week later, in federal court, Judge Martha Coleman looked sternly toward the defendant's bench. The courtroom was packed. Victims, family members, journalists. In the front row, Tanya Wilson held Isaiah on her lap, gently patting his back. "These men took an oath to protect and serve their community," began Prosecutor Hayes, his voice low but charged with righteous anger. "Instead, they used their power to instill fear in the most vulnerable among us." He paused, looking toward Isaiah. "They believed their victims would never speak up, that no one would listen to the elderly, the poor, the marginalized. But they were wrong. They didn't account for the voice of a child, a voice free of prejudice, untainted by fear, and able to recognize the truth when it stood before him." The trial lasted only 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. The badge, the bank records, the testimonies of now empowered victims. And Isaiah's recorded testimony, taken in a child-friendly room with Davis present, sealed the case. When the final verdict was read, "All defendants are guilty," the room fell silent. Then, from the second row, an elderly woman began to clap. Her applause spread like a wave until the courtroom erupted in sustained, thunderous applause. It was a moment beyond verdicts and laws, a moment of hope and truth. Outside, under the flashing lights of the media, a reporter approached Tanya. "What does it feel like knowing your son changed an entire system?" Tanya looked at Isaiah, who was innocently playing with a toy fire truck, oblivious to the media frenzy around him. She smiled, her eyes filled with both pride and pain. "I think that's exactly what we all need to relearn," she said firmly. to see the world through a child's eyes, without prejudice, without fear, and with the courage to point at what's wrong, even when wrong wears a uniform and a badge. The camera zoomed in on Isaiah, who smiled peacefully. In the background, families of the victims embraced, their tears mingling with laughter. Justice had finally been called by its true name. Outside the courthouse that final day, some stood holding photos of their elderly loved ones, those who hadn't lived to see justice served. From one small child's gesture, a quiet revolution had begun, one that reached far beyond what anyone had imagined. 6 months after the trial that rocked Oakwood, a city once known for silence and fear, a new era had begun. What once seemed like just 2 meaningless words from a 3-year-old had become the catalyst for sweeping reform across the criminal justice system. The Isaiah program, named in his honor, was officially launched and immediately transformed how cases involving marginalized communities were handled. Every such investigation was now subject to mandatory oversight by an independent civilian committee. Police body cams streamed live 24/7. A cutting-edge AI system was integrated to detect misconduct and help monitor internal abuses of power. "I never imagined my son would change the law," Tanya Wilson said through tears at the inauguration of the Isaiah Community Justice Center. She now serves as coordinator for a program that connects law enforcement with underserved communities. A role that's not just professional but a sacred mission for a mother who once stood face to face with evil in uniform. Not far away, behind the bars of a federal maximum security prison, former officer Thomas Reeves silently watched the ceremony on a small television in the common room. His 25-year sentence without the possibility of parole weighed even heavier as he saw Isaiah, now 4 years old, innocently cutting a ribbon with a pair of colorful plastic scissors. "Turn that off," Rivera, the former police chief, hissed from the back. His once carefully dyed hair was now fully gray, exposing the stark reality of a man who once held life and death, power, but was now buried beneath the very empire he built on others' suffering. The investigation triggered a cascade of arrests. Over 50 officers were fired. 11 received lengthy prison sentences. More than $12 million were discovered in offshore accounts and redirected to victim compensation funds. Isaiah, a once small name, had become a symbol for transforming a system that had long been indifferent to those most in need of protection. "The Isaiah case changed everything," said Hayes, now the U.S. Attorney General, in a keynote speech at Harvard Law School. "It forced us to realize that bias isn't just an individual failing. It's systemic, and when an entire system is built on prejudice, it will inevitably collapse at the hands of those it's meant to protect." Tanya's mother, now recovered from her injuries, became a powerful voice for elderly victims. Her testimony before Congress helped pass the Vulnerable Community Protection Act. And Detective Marcus Johnson, once dismissed as a paranoid old man, was awarded the Civilian Medal of Honor and appointed chair of the National Police Reform Commission. Meanwhile, Isaiah continued growing up free of the symbolic burden adults had placed on his shoulders. To him, police officers were no longer frightening shadows, but the people who came to his school to teach about justice and kindness. "Children see truths that adults often ignore," wrote Dr. Davis in her newly published book, which quickly became a national bestseller. "They aren't blinded by uniforms, status, or authority. They see people for who they truly are." On the last day of school, the teacher asked each child what they wanted to be when they grew up. When it was Isaiah's turn, he answered without hesitation, "I want to be a judge, so I can make sure everyone is treated fairly." The whole class burst into applause. Isaiah, though, didn't understand why. To him, it was simply the right thing to say. One winter morning, 2 years after the historic trial, Tanya received a letter. Inside was a large check and a note from Sandra Pearson, the former secretary of Rivera, now director of the Whistleblower Protection Program. I lived for years in silence, witnessing injustice but too afraid to speak up, Sandra wrote. Your son taught me that courage has no age. Sometimes just 2 words can change the world. Tanya folded the letter and looked out to the backyard. Isaiah was playing with another boy, the son of a former police officer now working in the community program. The 2 children ran through the sunshine, hand in hand, as if no boundaries had ever existed. True justice, Tanya thought, isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about building a world where children can grow up without fear of those sworn to protect them. Isaiah's story reminds us all that sometimes it takes the pure honesty of a child to expose the most painful truths. In a world tangled in complexity and broken systems, perhaps our greatest hope lies in the unfiltered simplicity of a gaze too young to look away. If this story moved you, click like to help spread its message. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of the inspiring journeys to come, and turn on the notification bell to join us whenever a new story is told. Stories of courage, justice, and belief in what's right, even when it comes from the smallest of hearts.